Hello, in this video we are going to look at the behaviourist approach, which is in your AS level in Unit 1 for psychology. So the behaviourist approach in a nutshell is all about learning, as well as behaviours. So the word behaviours may not surprise you, as it is in the title of this approach itself. So within the behaviourist approach, we will be looking at how learning occurs and how our behaviour is created. So within the behaviourist approach, it states that our behaviours and our learning occurs through two different methods. So the first of which is the classical conditioning. So the classical conditioning is one of the most basic types of associative learning. So the most important word here is associative. So this means that we make an association between one thing and another. So for example, if you are scared of spiders and you spot a spider, it may cause you to have a response. So this would be fear, and you may end up running away from it. Alternatively, you may make an association of seeing a mug makes you think of a cup of tea, and then that makes you thirsty and you decide to pour yourself a cup of tea. So you've associated the objects with the behaviours. So whether it be running away because you've seen a spider, or it's putting the kettle on because you've seen a mug and you remember that you've got some lovely tea in the cupboard, it will influence how you then behave. The idea of classical conditioning was first developed by the Russian scientist Ivan Pavlov. So classical conditioning is the first type of learning wherein an organism or a person or an animal responds to the environmental stimulus. So Pavlov established the laws of classical conditioning when he studied the dogs in his lab. So he studied them by using food. So there's a few different important words within this approach. So that would be stimulus and trigger response. So we're going to look at these in a bit more in depth. So in psychology, we'd like to abbreviate things to make things easiest for ourselves. So stimulus will be abbreviated to an S, and trigger response will be abbreviated to an R. So the unconditioned stimulus, which we abbreviate to US, will trigger the unconditioned response, which we abbreviate to UR. So what this means in a nutshell is the thing that you are getting a trigger from, so either the spider or the mug, will cause you to have a behaviour. So you haven't thought about this behaviour, but it's occurred naturally. So you see the spider, you run straight away. You see the mug and you turn on the kettle. This doesn't involve a lot of thinking, and it can occur very naturally. So this is why it's an unconditioned response. You have not learned how to respond in this way. It's just happened organically. So then next up, the neutral stimulus, which we abbreviate to NS, is a stimulus that does not have an unconditioned response. So it doesn't have a connection between an unconditioned response. So what we mean by this is no conditioning's occurred. So there's no connection made between the neutral stimulus and the unconditioned response. So you will not see a random object and act accordingly. So perhaps the first time you ever heard a dinner bell, you may not have realised that it was time to go for lunch. But over time, being in school, you learned that that bell meant that you could go on break and have your lunch break. So this is shown in the next stage here, where the unconditioned stimulus and the neutral stimulus are paired over time. So after a while, you tend to make an association whereby you know that you should act accordingly. And then finally, the pairing of the unconditioned stimulus and the neutral stimulus transforms the neutral stimulus into a conditioned stimulus, which we will abbreviate to CS. So this means that whenever the previous neutral stimulus is presented alone, the organism or the person will know how to act accordingly. So this creates a conditioned response, which would be CR, because we know how to respond accordingly. So this is the process in which conditioning can happen. So we will go over this a lot more in depth in class. This is just introducing you to the notion of classical conditioning. So the other method of learning and creating behaviours is that of operant conditioning. So this is the second one that we'll be looking at here. So this involves reward and punishment, which should not be new concepts to you. You should already be familiar with them. But how we use them is a little bit specific in operant conditioning. So this was developed by B.F. Skinner, and operant conditioning is a way of learning by means of reward and punishment. So this type of conditioning holds a certain behaviour and consequences either for a reward or a punishment. So either getting a lollipop or a gold star sticker for doing a job well done, or having a detention or being grounded. So the term operant was actually used by Skinner in order to give us a good overview of his theory. So by this term, he meant that this type of conditioning involves only external factors that affect behaviour and their consequences. So the whole of the behaviourist approach only considers external factors. So that means that our environment shapes who we become rather than anything innate within us. Okay, so I'm sure you can think of quite a few different reinforcements for behaviour and punishments for behaviour, but both of which have positives and negative versions. Okay, so reinforcement is a process of increasing the frequency or rate of a behaviour. So this is going to increase behaviour or make it occur more often. So if we want to increase behaviour, we can do this with a positive reinforcement or a negative reinforcement. So they are slightly different. So a positive reinforcement are favourable stimuli. So remember, we were talking about stimuli earlier. So positive reinforcement strengthens the probability of the behaviour by means of adding something good. So an example of this would be if you got an A in your exam, you would then maybe get a reward from your parents. They'd take you out for a nice dinner or something. Whereas a negative reinforcement is the removal of something favourable. So perhaps you had a U in your exam and your parents take away your mobile phone. So positive is increasing something, giving something, and negative is taken away. So this is increasing the behaviour. So we're increasing the behaviour with reinforcement by either adding something or taking something away. Okay, and then next up is punishment. So we all know what punishment is, and we've all probably at least been able to experience it. So in contrast to reinforcement, punishment is a process wherein stimuli is presented after the display of the behaviour to cause a decline. So this is where we say we don't want that behaviour, we want less of that behaviour. Thank you very much. But this must happen after the behaviour has occurred. So very similar to reinforcements, the punishments have positives and negatives, and again these are increasing or decreasing. So with a positive punishment, this is the addition of something which causes the decrease in repeating the behaviour. So punishment is stopping replication of behaviour and reinforcement is creating behaviours typically. So for the positive punishment, this is when something would occur where you display a behaviour which is not desirable, and perhaps your parents would punish you by shouting at you in public in front of all your friends, and then you feel embarrassed. Whereas the negative punishments are the removal of something which is favourable in order to decrease the likelihood of the behaviour from occurring. So an example of this could be if a teenager is caught cheating on their exam, the parents could forbid them to use their mobile phone or reduce their data or something like that. So your positive is increasing something, so you're increasing being scolded, and being negative is you're having something taken away. So the reinforcements and the punishments can be a little tricky sometimes for people to grasp. So this is something that I would suggest that you try to practice once we are in class and we are focusing on it together. So positive and negative punishments and reinforcements are something that we're going to cover when we're in class. So don't worry too much for now if you're not entirely sure about them. Okay, so in a nutshell, the behaviourist approach is concerned with behaviours. So it either wants to increase or decrease the behaviours, change them completely or stop them. So sometimes it will create behaviours or diminish them. This is all achieved through our external factors. So we develop this from our environment. So not only is our environment where we are, but it's also who we're around. So if you consider your friends, your family, where you live, this is all to do with your environment, and all of these, from the behaviourist point of view, will impact on your behaviours, who you are, and how you act. So that was just a very, very brief introduction to the behaviourist approach. And thanks for watching.